So you may or may not know it, but you are sitting in the largest Locknote session ever, by far. And we're all suitably impressed that so many people turned out for us. So there's like no pressure here. This is something we started years ago in our overseas events, sort of as a corollary to Keynote, Locknote. And we were really trying to create a nice kind of anticlimactic way to wind down the conference with some insights from the people who took all the time out of their personal lives to actually review and help select the content. And so it's a great way to say, well, this is how you thought the sessions might turn out, or these are the trends you thought were important. Now that you've done it, how does it feel? What did you gain as an insight? What did you think? And the other idea is we're going to try to run this like a conversation where you're sitting there in the audience and we're all friends and we're having a conversation and you're sort of listening in. And then further on in the session, we'll try to open it up. We have a microphone here in the middle and we'll take questions from you. And sometimes it's interactive. We'll ask people to raise their hands if we're like trying to argue over something. One year it was nobody buys deception services. Somebody else said, no, I think some people. So we asked the audience. One person bought deception services. Don't invest in that. I don't think that's going to work out very well. So I'm going to introduce our panel here, and then I want to kind of kick it off with some questions, and away we go. Ready?
You bet.
Okay. On my right, we have Chris Ng from Veracode. Long time. I'm sorry. I'm looking.
I think we switched the order, so now we've messed it all up.
They do they kind of look the same, but I get that confused as well.
It was just a test, if you remember us.
That's stage right. Stage
so much
right.
Zoom for so long.
From Veracode, long-time contributor in the security space, and on the United States, on the US Briefings Review Board. Okay. And then we have Natalie Silvanovich from Google, also on the US Briefings Review Board. We've got Justine Bone from MedSec, and she's on the CISO Review Board and the US Briefings Review Board. And then on my right, your left, Matt Suiche from Magnet Forensics, and he's on the United States Review Board and also our European Review Board. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly start with Chris and just say a little bit about like maybe your area that you're really interested in, like what you pay attention to, because you can't all pay attention to the submissions. There were what? How many submissions? How many hundreds?
1,000?
1,000?
Close to 1,000, yeah.
So much.
Over 1,000 submissions. You can't do that without your eyes bleeding.
Right.
So what is your approach? Let's start off with Chris.
Well, mine was application security. It's been my focus in my career for the past 20 years. And so I've had the fortune to be the track lead for application security this year. It's been called AppSec. It's been called SDLC, a few different things in the past. But just amazing, amazing submissions that we get in application security. Everything, which covers a pretty wide gamut, right? Everything from SDLC and CI/CD pipelines to Web3 and just standard web attacks. That's a big, big category. So I spent most of my time during this show almost going exclusively to AppSec talks because that's kind of what I want to see.
That's your jam.
And I want to make sure we're picking correctly. And I think we did.
Well, how do you
job.
tell? I mean, is it based on how many heads are in the room? That doesn't seem like a great metric. Or how do you get a good feedback, a feel if you did right?
Yeah, it's sometimes like title selection is very hard.
Yeah.
We find, and so you can have the most amazing technical content, and then you don't have a great title. You may not get a lot of people in the room, but the good thing is you can always go back and watch those later, and find out. And you hear, I like to go to Twitter and just find out, see what people are chattering about, and see, oh, I missed that one. Looks like it was, better than the abstract made it out to be. So I'll go back and watch it on YouTube or watch it on the replay.
I'm going to make an assumption, and I hope I'm proved wrong, but my assumption is Google, Natalie, AppSec?
Yes.
Or cloud, or what is it you like to?
Yeah, so I lead the hardware track. So at Black Hat, I really love going to the hardware talks. These will range from subtle and interesting CPU bugs to hacking crazy wild targets like cars or satellites. By day, I'm on Project Zero at Google, so I'm also super interested in exploit development and how to get code execution on all sorts of targets.
So it's that variety, like you're looking for some uniqueness there, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily the micro optimization in some exploit chain. You want to see something new and exciting.
Yeah, I always feel like I get the best ideas for new bugs and new exploits from Black Hat. I love seeing new stuff.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk over to Justine. Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, so gone are my hardware and InfoSec days. Once upon a time, sure, but today I'm on the policy track. And so when I look at
Is that another word for management?
well, story of my life right now.
Yeah.
So it's quite tricky though with the briefings reviews because you know you've got a very technical audience and you're looking at policy submissions. So you've got to try to find that content that's relevant to technical folks but is still talking about policy. So I try to look for things that are disruptive ideas. Or
disruptive, like I've got something crazy hair on fire, and therefore, or disruptive, but in a realistic,
credible, but perhaps slightly out there ideas.
Not clickbaity.
No, oh, never.
Yeah.
No. You're never going to get away with that in this
Right,
forum.
right.
But you know, there were a couple, for example, that once again revisited vulnerability disclosure, but they were slightly outside the box. There was one presentation about vulnerability disclosure on the blockchain. Yes. So things like that maybe bring together, you know, some level of innovation and technology along with a policy idea. Mm-hmm. But in addition, of course, with the CISO summit, it's a lot easier to consider policy or strategy or, you know, governance issues because that's the audience in the room.
So do you find yourself, for the briefings, focusing on sort of like tactical policy, and for the CISO, more like strategic?
Exactly, or a policy that will impact you know, in a tactical way, a more technical room, you know. So this is a policy shift that might impact my role as a security analyst or as an expert or as a security researcher, as opposed to a policy that might influence a change in corporate governance or, you know, regulation or something like that.
Right. Excellent. Okay. Matt.
But I do miss those hardware and InfoSec days. I'll get back to it one day.
Matt, with the word magnet forensics, I think I have a lead on what you're interested in.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been involved with the DFIR track, but as you all know, like we often happen to be in multiple tracks to help other people to review the submissions because we get so many.
Yeah.
I mean, the exploit development one is cool, like the platform security one is pretty cool. Application security is cool. Although, no, we don't know if for like blockchain stuff, it's going to be like Web3 security later, you know.
You and I want to talk about Web3.
I mean, I think we should have a new like track in the next few years called Web3 security.
I vote for that too.
So yeah, like just saying.
You're saying all these things are cool. It's like, is there anything not cool?
Hey, could we do it like a hands up at some point? Could we do like a hands up on Web3 and blockchain? Like, who would like to see a blockchain track?
Oh, Web3 security track. I like the name better. Okay.
There's a growing
First, I think you have to define what Web3 is.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Besides unicorns.
I mean, that
wasn't a lot of
North Korea just took like $700 million, you know, for it. You know, it's bigger than the central bank of Bangladesh.
There are a lot of security consulting companies making a lot of money from Web3 bugs right now.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm glad we sorted that out.
Yeah. Okay. So that's your jam. You're into.
But as long as there are technical presentations, like especially when you go to a conference, you like to see like technical content. If it can be a blog post, you know, that should not be a presentation. That's usually like my decision tree, you know. Should that be a blog post and I can just read it at home, or is it really worth attending the presentation?
Right.
For me, it's one of the biggest like decision maker. But just like Chris, you know, I like to watch like the slides and the presentations like later because it's impossible to see everything.
So when you're doing your sort of mental filtration, it sounds like you've got one of your first hurdles is, can this be a well-written blog post? If yes,
100%.
Write the blog post.
Yeah.
And if not, it has to have something additional.
Yeah.
One of the things I like to think about too is, are you elevating the speaker by giving them a stage, right? Is this a person, a group, a community you want to put on a stage in front of other people? basically be implicitly endorsing them. And it seems like this is a concern that's newer. Before it was just purely look at the technical.
Yeah.
And now we're having to look at more aspects, right? Yeah. So I'm wondering, does anybody else have your sort of, you must be this tall to get on main stage?
I try to, address bias, right? And I try, my sort of methodology is, obviously focus on the content, and I almost don't want to know who's submitted this and where they work and whether I've heard of them before or anything like that. And so I try to go through the content first, and then if I'm asking myself more questions, I'll go back and say,
are they credible? Okay, let's read their bio.
But we shouldn't be, obviously stopping opportunity for people who are new to presenting.
Right.
So I try to.
At DEF CON, we have an ability to submit anonymously. So if you don't want any of that to be considered, that gives some people some confidence to submit that normally might not.
Yeah, but it's hard because there are also people with amazing track records who consistently produce.
That always produce.
And we come here to see these people present. So you've got
the Dan Kaminsky track.
Exactly.
When Dan would submit, basically you knew you were accepting Dan.
I look for practicality a lot more than I think that I used to. I mean,
what changed then?
Well, I think, if you go back to the early days, there was definitely a lot of, you have to get the headline, you have to get the coverage of this really cool hack, this really cool exploit that's coming out at Black Hat, and there's going to be this big media blitz around it. And while there is still some of that, as the profession has turned into something that's a little bit more disciplined and it's, so multifaceted, I feel like there has to be a takeaway. There has to be something more than, like, this person did this really cool hack. That's great.
And more than the celebration of the feat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do I advance the state of the art back, when I go back home to my organization?
Right.
What do I do? And so, that's accomplished by some of these talks, like, James Kettle is always pushing the boundaries, like, here's another new way that HTTP is broken that breaks all assumptions, that then every pen tester can go back and use starting like probably tomorrow. It pushes the state of the art. It lets you find new things that you didn't know about before.
Right.
Anything that's a tool even, or a new practice or a new way of thinking about something you can take back. Yeah, there may be a cool hack along with that. But if there's a good technique that you can then go add to your arsenal, I feel like there has to be some kind of practical takeaway.
Yeah,
that's
like an
really
applied aspect.
Yeah, in every single thing that I review.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely find that with the hardware track. Like, there definitely is, like, the call of the cool. Like, the, wow, they made that car's windshield wipers flip back and forth. And certainly that is part of the hardware track. And I kind of feel like maybe every year there's one talk we pick just because the target is, like, so awesome that maybe we're less concerned about the technical stuff. But then there's so many other cool things.
Yeah.
For example, there was lots of fault injection this year, lots of CPU bugs. And while those are also very cool, they just don't have the same large appeal, same almost stunt hacker-ishness as some of the other submissions.
In your track, is it sort of like when there used to be sort of an IoT track, there'd be like IoT junk hacking, we'd call it. Oh, another embedded system running another ancient, it's like, it doesn't matter what it's running, it's the same system that's, so we'd call that junk hacking. Is the same sort of thing happening now? It's sort of like somebody learns a technique and now 30 people submit on that technique, so it's hard to weed out the ones that actually are doing the unique thing.
Yeah, that's definitely true. For example, something that's getting more mature, like auto-hacking, there's definitely ones that kind of apply the same techniques to new targets, and then there's the ones that actually have new stuff in them.
Yeah. So, favorite talks, things that wowed you, things that didn't surprise you,
So when I think about, it's not, the CISO Summit operates under Chatham House rules, so it's a very safe space for CISOs to share their insecurities and raise questions and kind of think about existential issues. Your CISOs that perhaps you work with might appear to be super confident and know how to solve every problem, but believe me, when they get together in the CISO Summit, there's a lot of insecurity and questioning, and we ask ourselves questions like, where do we belong in an organization? And we understand cybersecurity cybersecurity no longer just a technical issue. So one of the awesome concepts that we talked about this time actually was cybersecurity belonging to the ESG initiative of a company, the environmental social governance component of a company, as opposed to cybersecurity as a technical responsibility, which was rather an out there concept to be quoted.
I don't know. I want to think Halvar, but it wasn't Halvar. But somebody did I think it was the Spectre or the Meltdown CPU microcode patch, added something like 1% to 2% extra CPU cycles, and somebody calculated the carbon load of how much more pollution.
That's a very literal.
Right, like Amazon is now putting out 69,000 more tons.
Literally
because,
a bug and an ESG impact.
Right, and so when I hear this, I think that's probably not far out there. I bet in the future, when you're reading about the impacts, you're also going to see, and 99 new tons of something or other on the Azure cloud.
Yeah.
Real costs.
A lot of it was about, sharing responsibility and less sort of centralized cybersecurity oversight. So, for example, there's always that conversation about cybersecurity in the boardroom. And now we've got the SEC saying that, companies should have cybersecurity expertise in the boardroom. But the interesting problem that we've got to be cognizant of is if we've got this sort of concentrated cybersecurity expert, one of us, we're sitting now, we're on the board of directors. The risk with that is the rest of the board will kind of point responsibility for cybersecurity to that person and not share that risk across the board and across the whole leadership of the company, which is really how things should be. So a lot of talk about sort of centralized ownership and management of cybersecurity as opposed to everything being shared.
Plus, they're probably really excited to see each other after 2 years.
There was that too.
Yeah.
Also a very full room,
Yeah. I just kind of show from hands, how many people, by show of hands, did not expect so many people to be here?
I did not.
Yeah, I did not. I mean, I knew people would be here, but I was pretty surprised. Like, it came roaring back. And people are registering to conferences later and later. So it's very hard on the organizers because it comes in the last wave. Just like when you get your submissions, how many of your submissions come in on the last couple days?
It's like just when you think you're done,
God.
and then there's
it's always the case, pretty much.
Yeah, no, every year it's like, wow, 30 submissions, I can handle that. And then like 1 hour before the deadline, it's like, well, 250.
Yeah.
250 in the last hour. Take that in. How much time do you think she's going to put to those considerations
it's hard to
versus the people from 2 weeks earlier? Oh, yes, beer, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome.
Doesn't matter. I'll take an IPA. Thank you. So it was supposed to be you observing us having a casual conversation. So we need to have the beer to have the conversation.
Yeah, I am beer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So the
Do you want IPA?
I'll take the IPA, yeah.
Okay, you go for the IPA. Okay.
The thing about the
You're the one with
250,
the opener.
the 250 submissions at the end is that, you kind of get reviewer burnout.
Thank you.
Right? And the last thing you want to do is review a submission when you're feeling exhausted and burned out and all the words are just blurring on the page and it's so tempting to click next.
Next.
And you
Sounds
cannot
like the
do
other
that.
one. Yeah.
So you've got to sort of go away, you've got to manage your time and come back and be refreshed and give everybody a fair chance.
So when people submit and they say, I got it on the deadline, when are you going to tell me? And it's like, well, you got to wait weeks now because they have to digest this huge meal that arrives.
If you submit like 2 weeks before, like 1 week before, you'll get so much more like better quality review. Like I try to keep up with it. I try to, I don't know, 4 weeks before start to review, maybe like 10 talks a day or something like that. And I always try to keep up with it. And then of course that last day comes and then a fully 50 to 75% of the total come in on that last day.
Yeah.
And some people can plow through them, but I do think that you give it a little bit of short shrift doing that. So the ones that come in early, like I'm reading those like I'm putting a lot of attention on those because it's the only thing I have to.
Yeah, I would say the ones that come in early are the ones that get probably the most attention. I mean, that's how I operate.
Yeah.
Like
They
as
don't
soon as I
necessarily do that,
start
but
reviewing, I'm
yeah.
reviewing.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm going to say there actually is an advantage to submitting early in that they don't necessarily do the best, but we do pick some talks early. So if it's a very strong submission, you might get an early accept.
And I noticed that you get feedback in the early, when it's late, we don't have time to get your Q&A
Right.
feedback.
And the other no-brainer is if the review board asks a question, like a follow-up question, you must respond, eloquently and
Yeah, some people already make it
addressing the
easy to review
question.
the presentations because they don't have a good abstract. Like it's like they put no effort in submitting. So those ones are very easy to dismiss.
Yeah.
That's the good thing.
I'm going to shift the topic a little bit. Russia, Ukraine. We saw it influence some of the submissions, maybe around disinformation or misinformation, or maybe some networking attack or APT. But I'm curious, kind of more professionally, bigger picture, are we as an industry used to dealing with sort of APT levels and every other year it's a cry of cyber war? Now that it's actually here, is it what we expected? Did it, it's sort of like when I talk to people involved and I'd say, do you think Russia's used all their techniques? Or are they sitting on some for some reason? And the general consensus seems to be that we've seen it all. You've kind of seen one of each of everything.
I would say be very careful of taking that position.
Well, they say, why would you wait? Why would you wait 6 months in?
But my father was in Russian counter-espionage. He'd probably kill me now for saying this on a stage.
Yeah.
But it's so long ago, right? And one thing that he will say is these people who he has a lot of respect for think long term.
On those, I'm sure. But if you looked at the attack, the first week was nothing but attack, and then a week of nothing as they tried to figure out, what are we going to do next, right? And then another week of little less attack, and then a period of, and so I'm just curious, is what we've been preaching or reading about for so long is kind of happening in real time in front of us? Does it live up to the hype?
Well, I guess it depends. There's what we see and what we don't see, right?
Yeah.
If what we see is just like the numbers we have seen for the first 6 months, like wipers and stuff like that, I don't think there's capabilities for sure,
Yeah.
There's probably stuff that we're gonna see later on in a few years. It's all the stuff that happened, the shadow brokers thing happened.
Yeah.
And all those exploits got leaked, the data got leaked. We're like, oh, that happened 5 years ago, So I think we're probably gonna end up in a situation.
A long tail of other things coming out.
Yeah. Because we probably see I don't know, less than 10% of
But it's not like Fast and the Furious where there's the magic button and it shuts down the whole city and it's the AI that's gonna.
It's not like in the movies, you're
Yeah.
saying? We're not getting into the mainframes, turning down the firewalls? What are you saying? Oh my God, I've been deceived. Jeff Moss is telling me hacking is not like in the movies. Oh my God. Wow. Let me hold my chair. I need to recover from this.
Touché.
Not like in the movies, I quit.
Yeah.
But on that same note, with there maybe not being a single magic button, but in Kim Zetter's keynote today,
It was pretty.
Talking about some of the different groups that have infiltrated, operational technology, and that some of the almost like the workflows they had around okay, we'll make sure that you kill all these processes before you kick in the ransomware. It's almost like a magic button, right? It's almost like the switch that you flip. The research has been done to kind of do that, and so I think it is proving out to be as chaotic as we thought it would be, with the citizen army getting involved, and then the whole government backing
individuals. Yeah. The part I'm kind of surprised is how aggressive Microsoft seems to be in combating some of it. I sort of thought maybe some of the big MNCs would kind of sit on the sidelines a little bit and try to provide update services to everybody, but I was pretty surprised how some companies are
pulling out.
Yeah, pulling out or taking a stand. I've got a follow-up question. Defense, then. In this super pervasive offense environment, does defense stand a chance? And one thing I was thinking of, the companies that are really good at taking the tools away from adversaries probably can do really well in this environment because the adversary might not want to exercise them. And the only thing, I only have one real touch point is when we ran DEF CON for the first time fully online on Discord, the first year, people started targeting all the attendees with custom malware, trying to get them to click on videos or links or whatever. And it was, I don't know if it was a botnet, but it was a pretty concerted effort with a lot of unique malware. And so we scripted up a bot that just took every attachment and sent it to VirusTotal. And the attack stopped in 5 minutes. They just don't want their stuff in VirusTotal, right? And so it seems like defense has some techniques that can make life more miserable. I don't know many of them, but I'm curious. This would be the time for defense to shine, right?
I mean, I didn't know that's a cool story. That's a great example, I think, of what Chris Krebs said the other day, which was, moving from, I think it was from the government perspective, but moving from these long-running investigations to more disruptive action, right? In that situation, you saw something, you immediately took an action on it that would, create a situation that's harmful to the attacker. And
you want to raise their costs, right? We can't do an investigation, but I want to take your tools away.
Right. So that's a great way to kind of tie that together. And I think as defenders, we do have a chance. I mean, I'm largely on the defensive side of the house now, so it behooves me to say that. But I think I was going through my notes from all the briefings just before this, and the one trend that I kept seeing come up was changing our threat models. So like changing, the need to evolve our mental threat models.
Like they were too simplistic before, or too complicated, or?
I actually wrote these down because, so Krebs said, anybody that's running a technology that's becoming a core fabric of the internet has to realize that they are now part of the national security apparatus, right? Mindset shift. The CICD talk, the idea that pipelines, CICD pipelines control so much, and you have this like nice streamlined way to push stuff out to production and infiltrate in a way that you weren't able to do before. It's a different threat model than 10 years ago, when all you had to be worried about was being attacked directly and or individually. The Web3 talk, and Web3 was a very polarizing topic amongst the review board. I will tell you that.
Think North Korea.
And,
anything you need to know.
And it didn't end up with a track, but it ended up with at least one talk, and we'll see where that goes. But we're seeing all the same types of attacks in Web3 that we saw in traditional application security. You see see, now I forgot what the wallet hack was, but the one that was basically leaking private keys and mnemonics through overly verbose logging. Like, we're seeing these things play over and over again. But now with Web3, the threat model is different, because these attacks can happen instantaneously and in the open and anonymously. So I think as defenders, we have to be a little bit faster to think about, to modify how we're thinking about our threat model and adapting, rather than kind of using what we've always been used to.
Yeah.
I think I'm so glad we have the defense track here, because I do think there's this problem where, you shared a really clever idea for defense, but not all the ideas are super clever. And a lot of things that are required in being truly defensive are things like code review. They're things like knowing what all your assets are. Just thinking, for the hardware track, we had quite a few talks on fault injection, and then there's just one talk on techniques for preventing that. And I think that does kind of reflect security people's interests, and I think it's important that we understand the value of defensive solutions, because it is fun to break stuff, but...
Well, there's this concept, in offense, which is use it or lose it.
Yeah.
So, you've got the tool, Microsoft's going to release a patch, you have to now decide, dun, 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 use it or lose it. And so I kept expecting, with that tempo accelerated, we'd see a lot of use it, because there's all this FOMO of losing it. But I haven't really actually seen that play out, so now I'm questioning those assumptions.
Yeah, but the thing is, I think that is ignoring the broader issue, which is if you had 10% fewer bugs or 20% fewer bugs, attackers wouldn't even find themselves in that situation.
Right.
Or maybe not. That obviously wouldn't get rid of all of your bugs, but it would make it harder for attackers, make it more expensive. And defense isn't perfect, and I think it's always going to be a struggle with attackers, but I don't think we should ignore the fact that there are things we can do to make it less likely that they have toys to play with in the first place.
Yeah, or even like the quality of patches. I was just talking with one of the speakers before. He was saying what they have seen actually is the quality of patches is decreasing, and he sees a lot of like placebo like patches, where they just fix like the specific like use case you're giving, but not the actual bug.
Right.
And that's
if
happening
string
more and more.
equals EA.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Or like CVEs, you know, being like merged, like they would send like multiple bugs, and they would just get only like few CVEs.
And then the impact on teams.
Exactly,
dealing with
yeah.
things like patches that do nothing.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, like probably I've seen more.
What's driving that?
I don't know, like maybe the quality of like software engineers. Like even if you look now, I was talking with another speaker. We're just saying that a lot of the like offensive presentations, they're not coming from the same profile of people you'd see like 10 years ago. A lot of them come from like Google, for instance, like defense, like oriented like company. Like the whole profile of like offensive talks also like changed. Like the actual people doing like offense, we don't see them
Is that
anymore.
because we're not allowed to drop ODA anymore?
Is there less? I mean, I'm always curious, like when it gets harder to develop the 0 day, it becomes more valuable. So you're more likely to monetize it,
That's possible, yeah.
right? I mean, there was the trend in the early days of Black Hat where like, well, I'm famous enough now, my career's developed enough, I don't have to release that stuff anymore, now I can sell it.
Or because some vendors are not paying like researchers on time and they're waiting for like 1 or 2 years. You know, I don't want to drop any names, but it's like,
Right.
like there's a name that came up like few times, you know, like this week. I was like, oh, interesting.
Well, but that's true because there's a source of revenue now for security researchers and,
Well, it wasn't,
and
so
an incentive to, you know, present those results elsewhere.
Right.
Yeah, that was never there before, right?
The numbers just keep going up.
You know, do you guys ever pay attention to the value of when Zeronium would post?
I just get astounded every time I see those.
That's what I was thinking
Well, I'm
about.
doing
Just
the
like
wrong
the
thing.
like the $1 or $2 million for like a like iOS, I think.
Or Chrome? Yeah.
Yeah, like this is actually part of Project Zero will use.
You guys
this
probably
to,
pay attention a lot to it.
Choose our targets sometimes, that and other price lists, because it is a really good indicator of how much attackers value bugs.
I always get nervous when I see software like, we're not taking these anymore, we have too many of them. I was like, no, but I run that software.
Yeah.
That's going to be a problem.
But the value going up of a vulnerability must reflect the increased level of effort that has had to go into discovering that
It
vulnerability.
must?
Yeah, I
Right?
mean, it
Does it? Doesn't
Well,
it?
that's, I mean,
It's that hard
like-
now, right?
Look at
I can't just
it-
put like apostrophe equals semicolon, you know.
yeah,
dump-
but if you look at like the bridges in Web3, like some of the bounties are like $10 million. It's more than Apple for like iOS bugs and stuff, which is
right, because that's real money's moving
Yeah.
there. It'd be like if the Swift network said, we'll give you 1/10% of what you save us. And it's
Exactly.
$1 billion or something.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is hard to figure out for sure what a price means. It is a combination of how much it's valued and how hard it is to attack.
I'm always
But-
curious how much of it is, it tells you what attackers want. Like these are the targets, not necessarily what people are producing.
Yeah, and of course it's a balance.
Yeah.
Up until Web3, it made a lot of sense. It was like what attackers wanted, what maybe like
Maybe there is a
countries
correlation.
wanted,
Right.
and the level of effort. But yeah, like what Matt just said.
clearing
But
like,
you know,
house.
the interesting thing with Web3 is that there is not a regulatory requirement for these developers to obtain attestations of security, but they're doing it anyway.
They know it's coming, right?
These companies are going out there and paying a lot of money and waiting a long time for an independent third-party review of their code. If they're doing things right, there's a number that are not, but there are many that are. There's no regulatory body requiring them to do this. They're doing it so that they are adopted as a platform.
Well, it's like when
That's
you see,
incredible because
it's like when Trail of Bits announces that we did a 1.5 year review of some technology.
Right,
It's like,
right.
that was not cheap.
Right.
Yeah.
No. So that industry, whatever you want to call it, Web3, the Web3 community have
Yeah.
succeeded in establishing a best practice that never happened before. It took a regulatory pressure or some requirement, some compliance issue to require that penetration test report, right? People weren't doing it because it was best practice. They were doing it because they had to.
I've got one more topic, and then we'll go to some questions. And this is around complexity. In all the reviews, we always say that the systems are getting more and more complex, and complex systems are hard to secure, and they fail in unpredictable ways. when you're reviewing these talks, how much of the underlying bug or the newness or the there that made you want to select the talk, do you think, is any of it related to complexity? Like, the libraries are so complicated, the code paths are there's so many third-party dependencies. Like, a lot of these would not be issues, but for this complexity, or yes, there's more complexity, but it's kind of not relevant.
Are you talking about the complexity of what the researcher did or the complexity of the system they looked at?
It could be either. I'm always curious that if complexity is always increasing, does that just mean it increases for infinity and we're here when we're 200 years old and these systems look simple? Or is there sort of like a natural level? At some point, there's a maximum complexity level. We're just not there yet. That makes it so hard for researchers to understand it. Or because they're so complex, they can only look at this teeny little leaf and they'll never understand the big picture. And if that's the case, that means we're, as a community, losing the big picture. And I don't know if that's true.
I don't see the complexity. I mean, it's hard to imagine reaching a peak.
So that means forever.
Yeah. Well,
who here, show of hands, thinks that we're on the path of ever-increasing complexity with no end in sight? Oh, no. No. So think to yourself, because we don't know the answer. What does that mean? I don't think it means anything good. Besides employment for life.
Hard problems for our children.
Yeah. I'm an optimist here. I think unnecessary complexity in systems makes them less secure, and over time people are going to learn this and hopefully reduce the complexity to what's necessary. And
by programming in Rust, or?
Yeah, well, there's so many things. Well, programming in managed languages is one of them. Reducing attack surface and making sure that every feature is necessary is another.
Yeah. There are course corrections. I mean, entire frameworks or languages that make it harder to make common mistakes, that type of thing. But, meanwhile, while these new languages are being developed or frameworks are being developed, you also have like entirely new ecosystems popping up. And so like the pace of those things are at odds with one another, right? I think the complexity is just, when you ask the question, it made me think of, there's this, I guess it's basically a survey called the Index of Cybersecurity that Dan Geer started probably 15 years ago and has since handed off. But it started off with a handful of individuals in the industry just answering questions about kind of how they felt the threat levels were, and very pointed questions around their
kind of a temperature of the room.
Yeah, how do you feel about how are things going? And then it would come up with like a number. And anyway, over time, that number, if you look at the chart, that's never come down. It's just increasing and increasing and increasing. I think you could probably look over 15 years, and just the perceived level of threat and risk is always going up. And I think this is one of those things as well.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, well, I think the thing you can't ignore is the big increase in the number of people using technologies over the years, and just the sheer number of technologies. Now you've got Wi-Fi in your fridge, that sort of thing.
Right.
Not mine.
Well, you are missing out.
And also, like, there's a lot of people who like to reinvent the wheel a lot, because either there's some research that was not necessarily like visible or something. We see people like reinventing the wheel a lot,
That is a really good point. It's something I think as a board you probably all face too, which is somebody submits something, they make a claim that it's new or novel, and it's very hard as a review board member to verify that claim, because you can't just go to academic references. So unless you've been in the scene forever and you say, no, FX published something 15 years ago on that.
Yeah.
How do so I think as an industry, we don't do a very good job
of archiving stuff for the past 20 years.
Yeah, or having a referenceable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd even go farther. If it was 15 years ago, kind of, does it matter, or is this topic still?
Right, exactly. So bring it back nonetheless,
Right.
It's not
it can be like
necessarily
even more complex stuff, like programming languages. You mentioned Rust, with some friends who were talking about Carbon versus Rust, so Rust is known to have memory safety, but like the way they phrase it for Carbon is like it's on an incremental path to memory safety. It's like, what does that even mean? It means it's never going to happen, So what would you try to do a new language to replace like C++ to like have something that's not as good as Rust? It does not make much sense. And we see a lot of like side projects like this.
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's also a problem. And I also have a personal opinion on the fact that in security, is probably like proportionally, like the ratio of like software engineers is probably like lower than in the past. And you have more people who are used to like push buttons and use regex now. I don't have the data on this, it's my personal belief. But I think it's also playing in the, oh, everything sounds like so complex and everything, just because we don't have the right people to like summarize it.
Are the people being pulled away into cloud, big data, something else?
Lack of interest, like overwhelmed. Also, it's difficult, I guess, not to get into security, partly because there's so many things. So the question is always like, where do you start? So it's easy to be misled on focusing on the wrong topics. What's your opinion on that?
We are still talking about the level of technical content that we need to be addressing to be a cybersecurity expert. Like, we're still talking about the fact that cybersecurity is not just a technical issue, and we need to address the skills gaps and the skills shortage, and we should be looking at people from all backgrounds, not just highly technical experts. But at the same time, at the CISO Summit, we had a whole presentation about how the schools are putting out badly skilled cybersecurity people who don't have enough technical knowledge, unfortunately, to be helpful.
I have this is a couple-year-old story, but supports your claim. I was in Washington, D.C., or right outside, and I was supporting this conference. And in the conference were a lot of universities. And one guy from the university in public said this out loud at this panel, so kudos for him for courage. And he said, our university, XYZ, we want to be a leader in cybersecurity. And we want to be in the top 10. We know we can't get to the top 5, but we want to be in the top 10 within 3 years. What advice do you have for me? I said, that's great. You probably want to get buy-off that you can teach offensive information security to the students, because if you don't understand how offense works, you can't really teach defense. Okay, maybe not the top 10. And he just I could see him run through the politics that he would have to go through with his provost and his board of directors to explain that he's teaching students offense, and he was like, nope.
Wow.
And so that's like the problem in a microcosm.
Yeah.
It almost seems like the bar, like that would definitely put you in the top 5 or 10 to have a good offensive. But like what we heard at the CISO Summit, which I guess we're not supposed to say who was presenting, but it was simpler than that. It was that the cybersecurity programs undergraduate level cybersecurity programs are not even sending out students with the fundamentals of networking.
Right.
Like if you don't understand like the basics of like TCP/IP and just like networking and how that stuff works, but you have an understanding of like maybe what's happening in the policy realm of cyber, or all those things that they're trying to put into the curriculum, you can't get very far. It's not all technical, but you have to have a certain technical foundation. You have to be able to write some code. It probably doesn't have to be great code, but like increasingly, actually, it probably does. As there's this crossover between security professionals and software engineers. But
you don't need to
the
write
bar is
code
pretty low.
to be a great communicator, to teach security awareness training, right? Which is a
No, but you need to
component of the
probably understand the priority when you're teaching it, like this is why this is important, or this is why.
So I guess that's the question we should ask ourselves, like how deep do these people need to go to be effective in a role like that?
So we're out of time, and so I want to give it a one round to everybody for closing thoughts. Any points you want to make? Anything you want to leave?
Is this thing going to be even bigger next year?
I hope so. I mean, generally we have a lot of people that come from China and Asia, and a lot of those people didn't travel because they couldn't.
Yep.
So I don't see how it would get smaller.
Amazing.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start. I'll start with Chris. Any final thoughts you want to leave? The holdouts, the hardcore people that have waited it out here?
We're still seeing a lot of the same problems. We're seeing it manifest in different ways, I think, as it applies to new technologies, but we're seeing a lot of the same problems. And so I think that whole theme of we have to be quicker at adapting the lessons that we already know. We already know about logging. We already know about like basic secure coding issues. We know, we know what things to do in a large part, and they're just not getting done. And so, good job security. but you know, it's kind of more of the same. It's a little bit discouraging on the sort of optimistic front.
The incrementalism.
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing things getting better in pockets. I mean, we're, you know, sitting where I sit in application security, we are seeing, you know, habits get better around software security and integrating security into the, you know, DevSecOps and things like that. But like too slowly, right? Way too slowly. So we've got to get better.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like Chris has said a lot of what I wanted to say already.
Sorry.
But
is hardware slower or easier or harder?
yeah, well, I mean, there's kind of complex challenges in hardware in that it is harder to fix things. It's like more complex than software. But what I will say is also, every year doing the hardware track, I am so impressed by all the talks we get. I think it's one of the most competitive tracks, and yeah, I am so amazed by the research we see every year. So, well, I feel like there's a lot of problems. I'm also really inspired, so I think everyone should keep at it. And I do feel like one day we are going to solve these problems, or at least make a lot of headway.
I would just probably revisit the application, the ideas around the application of our security research community to innovation that's impacting everyone. So the great example of us doing that is standing up the AI track, which is a couple of years ago. A bad example of us not doing that is not looking at things like blockchain, which is changing the world and has a ton of security issues. And I think that we get so in the weeds sometimes with bug classes and, you know, really deep security research, which is great, but we should still try to map that to what, you know, that sort of high-level technology trends that impact everyone in our communities, and try to sort of connect those dots a bit more, be a bit more open-minded about how this actually impacts people around us.
Yeah, no, I agree on the fact that, like Chris said, you know, like it feels like some of the things, the problems are always the same. So is it because like things are moving slowly, or because we are missing like new trends, you know? Because like as the security industry, we're just like so focused on the same problem that we are missing actual problems on like looking the motives of the attackers, you know, like why they do something, and then maybe it's going to help us to understand, okay, like how, you know, instead of like looking from the how to like finding the why.
I'm really proud that we got through this without using the word fake news or AI.
No, I said AI.
Yeah.
You did?
I did.
Drink.
And blockchain.
All right, well, that concludes our session. Everybody, thank you for attending. The videos will all be edited and put online eventually for free. Share with your friends. We'd love your feedback. We'd love getting your comments. So we'll see you on the Twitters. And if you're around later this week, we'll see you at DEF CON. Thank you.